All right, all eyes will be on Queen's Park today as the Ontario government expected to focus on getting through this pandemic. When the budget is released, the province will likely pump funds into some sectors desperately needing that financial boost. What else can we see? Joining me now is Richard Southern, 680 business editor. Good morning to you, Richard.
Mel, good morning. How are you today?
I'm doing all right, and I know you are going to be combing through the numbers. The first big number I want to get to is a lot of people are focused on the deficit and what it means and how long it's going to take to pay off. So let's paint that picture beginning there.
Well, I mean, it's already at a record high. I mean, the Ford government, unveiled its last budget in the fall in November, and that featured a $38.5 billion deficit, the biggest ever. It was also the biggest overall spending budget in Ontario history. And sources tell me, Mel, those numbers are only going to get bigger today. Look for a big spending budget from the Ford government. Sources tell me that this is really going to be aimed at getting Ontario through the pandemic. This is not a recovery budget. This is the government saying, listen, we're still in the throes of this pandemic. Now's not the time to hike taxes. Now's not the time to cut back on programs. Now's the time to spend on things like hospitals. You know, we've already seen some of the pre-budget announcements, $1.2 billion for the hospital sector, $933 million for long-term care. There's going to be more of that. We got the Toronto Sun this morning reporting that potentially a new hospital for Brampton will be in this budget. So, it's not going to be your typical conservative budget, but that's because, we're not in a typical time right now, Mel. There's going to be a lot of expenditures here today.
We definitely are not in a typical time right now. Let's talk a little bit about how the day is going to play out before we get into some more specifics. The minister is actually going to go with tradition and buy these new shoes. And then you get into the lockup, right? So what is the timing on the day?
Yeah, budget's always very interesting, and there's a lot of tradition involved. So yes, Peter Bethlenfalvy, who, by the way, he's delivering today, Mel, the third budget from the Ford government, and he is the third finance minister. That's very unusual to have a different finance minister for every budget. But First Minister, Mr. Fedeli, shuffled out of that position after a budget that was poorly rolled out, the first one. Rod Phillips had his trip to the Caribbean. That got him out. So here we are with Peter Bethlenfalvy. Yes, he's going to be in Pickering this morning, I'm told, to buy a new pair of shoes, which is tradition. Me and my fellow journalists will be at Queen's Park. We're going to get the budget at 9:30. We can't talk about it, though, Mel, until the minister rises at 4 o'clock in the House. And that's when you're going to hear all the details on 680 News and CityNews, and we'll have it all for you online as well.
Richard, one of the big pieces that a lot of people will be watching for is the idea of universal childcare, specifically the impact it has had on the workforce and the segment of the population, looking at a lot of women being pushed out of the workforce in the last year. What can we expect there?
Again, this is not something you'd expect to hear from a conservative government, right? This is actually something the NDP have kind of been pushing for. But the finance minister, his former chief of staff, wrote an op-ed in the Toronto Star this week calling for some sort of universal childcare. So people were looking at that as a signal that it's coming. And indeed, Minister Bethlenfalvy was asked about it yesterday, and he basically didn't deny it. He's like, well, we're going to have to wait for the budget. This would be a way to, as you say, encourage more women to get back into the workplace. It would take the burden off of families if they don't have to pay for or pay as much for childcare. But, Mel, this would be another huge expenditure. And certainly when you're talking about childcare and you're talking about building hospitals, these are things that really add to the bottom line. And the question is, are we going to see any sort of path out of that red ink? Is there going to be a light at the end of the tunnel? Yeah. Here's how we get rid of the $38 billion. We don't know yet.
At the end of the political tunnel, we're looking toward June 2022, and that's where we're supposed to get back to the polls as well. So, of course, there's that game as well. Richard, as always, appreciate your time and enjoy the virtual lockup. I always like that term.
Thanks, Mel.
All right, take care.
See you soon.
7-11 is your time right now. We're joining Sid and Dina. What is in your food? That's the question.